Psalm 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it." And if this statement is true, then it has profound application in the way that we view our place in this world. It means that you and I belong to Him. If everything He's made and created belongs to Him, that word belong, that has a strong sense of meaning behind it. That we belong to Him, and everything in it belongs to Him as well. Of course, we have things that belong to us, but do they really belong to us, or do they ultimately belong to God? And He's given us the stewardship of what He's given to us in this world. Of course, we as mankind have been able to take what God has created, and we've recreated things out of what He has made, things for our use, things for our enjoyment, things for the purpose of being able to survive and to live and to enjoy life. And so while things belong to us, ultimately they belong to God. And we need to take a look at that today. And in that light of everything belonging to God, we'll look at a parable. We actually went through this little story last summer when we were talking about our attitudes, as we were considering that the fact that someday all of this will end. And so I have a lot more I said about it back last summer, but we're just going to go over it and bring over a few points related to this as well. It's a story that Jesus told, a parable. We found in Matthew 25:14-30. And you can just sit back and listen. It's familiar if you've heard it before. And when he says the word talent here, talent is basically a unit of money. So we're talking about a unit of money here. But Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who received the 5 talents went at once, traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came, and he settled his accounts with them. He who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more.' And his master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more.' And the master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' He who received the 1 talent came forward and said, 'Master, I know that you're a hard man. You reap where you don't sow, and you gather where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you can have back what is yours.' But his masters answered him, 'You wicked and slothful servant. You know that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have at least invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with some interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast that worthless servant into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" In this story, the master, he owns it all, and he has servants who help him manage the things that he owns. And he gives to each servant according to their ability. To some, they're able to handle 5. To some, able to handle 2. Some just 1. Doesn't mean that one's better than other. He just knows what we're able to handle. And gives rewards accordingly to the way that they used what he had given to them. The one that was given 5, he made an investment that brought back 5 more. The one that had 2 brought back an investment of 2 more. That's pretty good. Both of them doubled what they had. The one that had 1, he could have gone out and doubled it as well and come back and given the servant 2, and he would have heard, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master." But no, he squandered what he had. He did nothing with it. And that servant was sent away, considered to be worthless. And if we take this parable upon looking at the whole verse that we just said, that said the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, everything belongs to him, and God himself is that master who entrusts to us what we need for our daily bread and beyond that. Obviously, you can take a parable, a story like this, and it doesn't just apply to money. It's our time, it's our resources, it's our talents, it's our ability to be able to live for God, and we want to multiply those things and make them count for something in our lives. But today, just looking at the money issue, and usually I just preach once a year on money. We don't really talk about it from the pulpit very often. But usually somewhere towards the beginning of the year, I usually bring a sermon to help us just kind of think about our finances. And since we're in the middle of a campaign to make sure that we can meet our budget for the coming year, it seemed very appropriate to be able to just kind of take a look at this issue as we think about how we are stewards of the money that God has given to us. God's entrusted us with money. For some of us, it's a little bit. For some of it's a lot. You know, we can always look at somebody else and say, well, they're better off. They should be able to help out more than I can. It's easy to do that, but God says, no, focus on what you have. Okay, the servant that had 2 or the servant that had 1, they didn't look at the one that had 5 and say, well, I don't have to do anything with my 2 or my 1 because that person has 5. You know, we're not to compare. We're responsible for what God has given to each of us individually, whether it's much or whether it's little. So whether I have millions or whether I have hundreds, it's all the same. God wants us to be responsible in using what we have to be able to glorify him. Each of us have some source of income. Some of us get a paycheck because we go into work every day. Some of you used to go into work every day and you get some sort of pension as a result of that because you've already put in your hard labor. Sometimes what we have comes through inheritance. Sometimes it's through gifts. Sometimes it's through investments. And it doesn't matter where the wealth comes from. What matters is we decide how we're going to be responsible with what we have. Now, does it mean because it all belongs to God that we just come every week and everything that in our bank account, we just write out on a check, bring it down to 0 and give it to the church? Of course not. We'll take a look at that here in a minute here. Because how we spend our money is whether we're actually bringing it to the church or using it to be able to supply for the needs that we have around us. We want to glorify God in all those things. You know, it's interesting. There's more written in the Bible about how to manage our money than there is about how to get to heaven. Because, how to get to heaven, that's pretty cut and dry. When it comes to how to handle our finances, that gets a little tougher sometimes because there's so many, well, what about this and that and this and that? There's so many issues related to it that God has a lot to say about it. And if you were to go through the Bible and read everything God has to say about money and finances, you would be spending a lot of time reading those parts of the Bible. But just to narrow it down here, and we're not going into tons of details about it today, we're just in a very short sermon about it, but there's 4 areas that the Bible talks about that we need to be responsible with our finances. The first one is how to care for our family, how to care for those that we have been trusted with in the relationships that we have, in the context of family. How we care for our family is very important, and the Bible has much to say about that issue, that we need to be making sure that those needs are provided for. Because if we're not providing for our family, then the Apostle Paul tells us, man, we are as worthless, we are shameful, it's a terrible thing to not be able to provide for those in the context of family that we've been given. The Bible has a lot to say as well about how to care for others that are in need. Maybe they're not in our family, but there are other people around us and we see needs. And God is very particular in saying, we need to help. Of course, we get into the whole issue, well, do they deserve it? Why aren't they working? Why aren't they? I mean, there's so many cloudy issues that make it kind of gray in our minds about how to help others. And if I'm helping them all the time, aren't I just making them dependent on it? And there are some issues like that we wrestle through. But when it comes down to it, the Bible is so full of admonitions that we need to be providing and helping the needs of others. We need to do it wisely. We need to do it in a responsible way. But we need to have an eye and a heart for those around us who have legitimate needs that they're not able to take care of on their own. And we, as people who follow Jesus, get the opportunity to be able to, in his name, with his love, be able to help the needs of other people around us. Another area that we're told to care for is the needs of the church. Even going back to the Old Testament, when they didn't have the church, but they had the temple, the people brought everything that was needed to be able to build it and to supply the needs that were there of the priests, of the work that went on. And so even in the New Testament, when the followers of Jesus gathered together, we read many times throughout, especially the book of Acts, and even Paul writes about that the offerings come together to be able to keep the organization of the church alive and going. And that's one of the needs that we're talking about specifically as a church. We have a church budget to be able to make sure that what exists in this building and outside of it is able to keep going. Now, as a church, we do some of the other things. We do care for others. A little part of our budget is to help other people. It's a small part. Hopefully it can grow. But part of our budget is to help other people. But part of our budget is to do the fourth thing as well, how to care for the outreach of the gospel. The Bible is very clear that we need to be giving to the cause of helping other people know about Christ. And so we need to be giving to that as a church. We're trying to develop kind of a missionary program that we're giving to. And we've got a few little initiatives that we've already kind of been working on and trying to get some things going in the future. But we want to make sure that we aren't just worried about ourselves having things right with God, but what about those out there that have the opportunity to hear about Jesus, but they can't unless the finances are there to help people to be able to go into the world and let them know about the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. And those four areas, I mean, the Bible's full of admonitions. You have to take my word on it today. We're not digging into all of them. But those are the four areas that we need to be responsible with in our finances. Taking care of our family, taking care of the needs of others, taking care of our church, and taking care of the spread of the gospel. And if we kind of look at our budget and we think, am I doing anything in those areas? What am I doing to be able to contribute so that I can stand before Jesus and say, and hear, well done, good and faithful servant, because God's given us something to be able to take care of those areas. Now, of course, taking care of our family, that's going to be the biggest chunk of it, and that's okay. That's good. But what are we doing to try to do the other things as well? I think God wants us to be able to do it because these things are important to him. Of course, it's easy to look at that and think, okay, this is one more bill, but it comes from God. I'm supposed to take care of all these other things as well, and contribute. I mean, it feels like a bill. But God doesn't want us to give out of duty. He wants us to give out of love, out of the goodness of him, of his love for us. We reach out in love for others, and we do take care of others in need, and we take care of the spread of the gospel. We take care of the church, and we make that happen out of love. Jesus said in Matthew, he said, you can tell a person's heart by where his treasures lie. If a person's spending all the money on themselves, then obviously that's the most important thing. If the person's spending all their money on their family, then maybe that could step past being an important thing and become an idol, where we're just spending the money on the people we love and not on the other things that God loves. If we were to sell everything we had and give the money to the mission field and we didn't have any money for us to take care of our kids with, now that would be wrong as well, because we're getting things out of balance. We're getting things out of the way that it should be. And so if we value the things that God values, then we will find a joy in giving to the needs of others, in giving to the needs of the church, in giving to the needs of spreading the gospel throughout the world. And as we give to those things, it shows that our heart is in the right place, that our heart is lining up with God's heart about the things that are important. There are three ways that we can give. One is to give more. The Bible talks about a goal of giving 10% of what we have to God's work. Now, there isn't a direct command. There's not an 11th commandment that says you must give this much money to God. There's a principle that we see throughout the Bible that kind of centers around that 10%. And some people, they stick to that and say, okay, I'm going to give my 10%. Other people see it as a guide, and we don't get really strict about it. But maybe look at your budget. Are you giving 10% to God's work? If you sat down and figured out how much you make and how much you're spending, is there room in our budget to aim to give 10% to God? There might be times in life when that 10% gets really squeezed. There might be times when we can do more than 10%. There's some people that God's blessed with a sense of financial security, where they have more money than what they need to live on and to provide for their family. There's nothing wrong with storing up money for the future, for that crisis that comes. There's nothing wrong with saving up some money to pass on as an inheritance. That's a great thing to do. But maybe we have the chance to live in a way that we have way more than what we need to live on, and we can give even more than 10%. Maybe we can live on 10% and take the other 90% and give it to God. We all are in different places on that, but if we're able to give, God is delighted in that. Sometimes we just need to redirect our spending. Maybe sometimes we don't have money to give to God because we're wasting it on things that if we were to redirect our budget, we'd be able to give to God. And that's something sometimes we can take a look at. And sometimes it's just the nickels and dimes. It's that running through and buying that coffee at McDonald's through the drive-thru. Could I have made it at home, taken 5 minutes and made it and saved $3? Sometimes there's ways that we could think about, is there something I can do to trim my budget? Maybe I won't go out to eat as often, or maybe I won't set the thermostat so high in the wintertime. There might be some ways that we could think, if I sacrifice just a little bit here and there, then I would have some money to give to God. And what joy that would be to say, I'm gonna redirect my budget a little bit and cut out a few things, and then at the end of the month, I know I'm gonna have about this much sum left over. I can give it for God's glory, for something. It would be a great exercise to think through our life, and maybe even just take the first week, write down everything you spend, and then at the end of the week, look at it and say, are there some ways that I'm kind of maybe splurging that I could come back and give some of that to God? What joy that would be. So maybe take that experiment, try it out. We all have different ways that we handle our budget and our money, but just some ways to maybe redirect our spending. Another way is to invest. Jesus told this story about these servants, and of course this wasn't a church, it was his business, it was his enterprise, but he invested and made the owner more money. Maybe there's a way we could be creative and think out of the box. Maybe you don't know how to redirect your spending, or you don't have any more to give, but you could think, how could I invest in something that would bring forth something for the Lord? And I think this is a principle as well that we could use. Maybe take $20 or $50 or $100 of what you normally give to God and say, I'm going to take this money and try to find a way to make it grow, so that when it does grow, I can not only give that sum back to God, but I can add something to it. There might be some creative ways to do that. And most of us are in business where we have the opportunities to do that, but what about doing some sort of creative fundraiser? Take $50 that you would give to God and decide, I'm going to use that money to go buy a bunch of food that I'm going to make. I'm going to invite my friends to a dinner party and say, hey, on this particular night, I'm making this meal. I'd love for you to come over. And it's kind of a fundraiser sort of thing. So what you would have spent on going out to eat this weekend, come here to my house, enjoy the fellowship of friends together and put that money you would have spent at the restaurant in a basket. And I bet you're going to end up making that $50 turn into something more. And it's just a creative way. It may sound really awkward to invite people over in that way, but I think people would get the idea, and we're always looking for ways to come together, and that might be a creative way to be able to do that. Maybe you could take $20 and buy some craft things and make something that you could sell somewhere along the way. I don't know, just put it up on Facebook. Hey, I'm selling this thing. You know, I mean, people do it all the time. You could make that $20 that you put into these craft materials, and somebody's got this cool looking whatever it is you made, and you've got some extra money to be able to give to God. I don't know, the sky's the limit. What do you have a knack for? What do you have a knack for, and how could you invest that into making some money for God? Consider that as you're thinking about your giving. My wheels have been turning this week and thinking, maybe I could do something too, to be able to just have fun doing it, but I'm doing it for God. It's a pretty cool concept, and it's right here in the scriptures right here. Maybe give yourself until Easter time. Say, between now and Easter, I'll take a little part of what I give, and I'll invest it into some way that I can make more money come. So by Easter time, I could put even more money in the offering plate than what I could if I just put it in right now. Consider that as an option, especially as you're filling out your commitments. We're asking the families of the church to do that, what they can do this year. You may even want to write down there, hey, I can't really give more right now, but maybe I'll take this investment idea, and I'll take $50 of what I give, or $100 of what I give, and I'm going to pray and see what God will do to make that grow, so that by Easter time I could even give more than what I could give right now. Keep that open as an option. Jesus kind of gave us that hint of a way to be able to do it, and nothing against that at all. I know that we have a very generous congregation. It's when we've done fundraisers, you know, the Broomcorn Festival, people are donating to be able to sell the things that we do, to be able to earn some extra money. I mean, our roof fund has jumped to where we're almost halfway there because we've had a lot of funds from Broomcorn over the last couple of years. So we're thankful for ways to be able to provide like that. When we had the auction in November, I mean, it's amazing what people in fun will pay for a bag of this or that, you know, to take home with them. But we earn some money that we can use for God's purposes by having a fun get-together in a way that we know that we're giving into the Lord. You know, the offerings, we appreciate what you give. Some of you give really sacrificially. I personally don't know what anyone gives. I mean, when Pam puts it all together, I stay away from her desk. I have no idea what people give. It's between you and God. It's a chance for you to be able to say, God, you've entrusted me as a steward of everything that I have belongs to you in the first place. What can I take of what you've given me and give back to you? That's the question we ask ourselves today as we go into this new year. Let's pray.